Have you ever experienced that moment when the tables turn so dramatically that you can actually see the color drain from someone's face? That moment when the person who once made your life a living hell suddenly realizes that you now hold their entire future in your hands? I have, and I'm not going to lie to you. There was a part of me that savored every single second of it. My name doesn't matter, but my story does, because what happened to me could happen to anyone. And the way I handled it might help you understand something crucial about power, revenge, and what it means to truly be in control. Let me take you back to a Tuesday afternoon that changed everything. A moment so perfectly orchestrated by fate that it felt almost too cinematic to be real. I was sitting in a sleek conference room on the 32nd floor of a building I once couldn't even dream of entering, wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly rent used to be. When they walked in, three people, three faces I knew better than my own reflection, because I had stared at them with a mixture of fear, resentment, and helpless anger for years. My former supervisors, the ones who had made my early career an absolute nightmare, who had crushed my confidence, mocked my ideas, stolen credit for my work, and made me question whether I even belonged in this industry. And now here they were walking into my conference room for an interview that I was conducting, for positions that I would decide whether they got or not. The irony was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. I watched them enter, their faces initially showing that typical nervous confidence that job seekers wear like armor, their smiles professionally polished, their handshakes firm and rehearsed. They didn't recognize me at first. Why would they? I was just another faceless employee they had trampled on their way up, another name on a roster of people they had used and discarded without a second thought. But I recognized them immediately. Sarah Mitchell, with her sharp tongue and sharper elbows, who had once told me in front of the entire office that my presentation was so bad it made her embarrassed to work in the same department. Marcus Thompson, who had a talent for making you feel small with just a look, who had blocked my promotion twice because he said I lacked leadership qualities, while he took credit for the project framework I had spent 6 months developing. And Jennifer Rodriguez, the master manipulator who played politics like a chess game, who had spread rumors about my work ethic and nearly got me fired for her own mistakes. These three people had formed an alliance that made my life unbearable for 2 years, and now they sat across from me, completely unaware of who I was. I let them introduce themselves, watching their performances with the detached interest of someone who already knows the ending to a movie. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but my face remained perfectly calm, professionally neutral, giving nothing away. This was my moment, but I wasn't going to rush it. Good things, as they say, come to those who wait, and I had waited a very long time for this. The meeting started normally enough. I asked standard interview questions, letting them showcase their accomplishments, listening to them embellish their roles in projects I knew they had minimal involvement in. It was fascinating, really, watching them lie so effortlessly, seeing them present themselves as innovative leaders when I knew firsthand they were credit-stealing tyrants who built their careers on the backs of people like me. Sarah talked about fostering collaborative environments, which almost made me laugh out loud considering she had once made a junior analyst cry in a meeting for suggesting a different approach. Marcus spoke eloquently about mentorship and developing talent, when in reality he had systematically undermined anyone who showed potential to outshine him. Jennifer emphasized her commitment to ethical leadership and transparency, which was rich coming from someone who had thrown multiple colleagues under the bus to save her own skin. I nodded, took notes, asked follow-up questions, all while a war raged inside me between the professional I had become and the wounded person I used to be. Part of me wanted to end their misery immediately, to reveal who I was and watch their faces crumble. But another part, the part that had learned patience and strategy through years of hardship, wanted to draw this out, to let them hang themselves with their own words before pulling the rug out from under them. So I continued, asking about their management philosophy, their approach to handling difficult employees, their thoughts on workplace culture. With each answer, they dug themselves deeper, contradicting the reality of who they actually were, creating a portrait of leadership that was the complete opposite of what they had demonstrated when they had power over me. Then came the moment. About 45 minutes into the interview, Jennifer mentioned a specific project from 5 years ago, one that I had actually led from conception to completion. She described it as her own initiative, talked about the challenges she had overcome, the innovative solutions she had implemented. It was my work, Every single detail was something I had created, problems I had solved, innovations I had developed while barely sleeping for weeks to make the deadline. And she was sitting there, in my conference room, claiming it as her own achievement, using my blood, sweat, and tears as her interview highlight. Something inside me shifted. The careful control I had maintained began to crack. I could feel the anger rising, not hot and explosive, but cold and calculated. I looked down at my notes, took a slow breath, and then looked up at her with a slight smile. I said, and I remember my exact words because they're burned into my memory, I said, Jennifer, that project was indeed remarkable. The framework design was particularly innovative. I'm curious, though. Can you walk me through the specific methodology you used for the data integration phase, because that was quite complex if I remember correctly. I watched her face carefully. There was a flicker of uncertainty, a brief moment where her confident mask slipped. She hadn't actually done that part of the project. I had, and the methodology I had used was unconventional, something I had developed specifically for that challenge. She stammered slightly, then launched into a vague explanation that anyone with actual knowledge of the project would recognize as complete nonsense. That's when I decided it was time. I had been patient enough. I had watched them perform, had given them rope to hang themselves with, and now it was time to pull back the curtain. I leaned forward slightly, folded my hands on the table, and said in a voice that was perfectly calm but carried an edge that made all three of them suddenly focus completely on me. That's interesting, Jennifer, because I actually implemented that project from start to finish. I was the project lead. You were my supervisor who took credit for it in the final presentation to executives. The room went completely silent. You know that expression about being able to hear a pin drop? It's real. I could hear the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic from 32 floors below, the almost imperceptible hum of the lights overhead. I watched their faces, and this is the part I want you to really understand, because it's important. I watched recognition dawn on them slowly, like a sunrise you're dreading. Sarah's eyes widened first, her mouth opening slightly in shock. Marcus actually sat back in his chair as if he'd been physically pushed. Jennifer, to her credit, tried to maintain composure, but I could see her hands gripping the armrests of her chair, her knuckles turning white. It took them a moment to place me, to dig through their memories and find the face of the person they had treated so poorly. And when they did, when they finally recognized who I was, the transformation was extraordinary. I continued, keeping my voice level and professional, though inside I was experiencing a rush of emotions so complex I couldn't have named them all if I tried. I'm Alex Chen, I said, using my full name deliberately, enunciating clearly so there would be no confusion, no possibility of mistaking me for someone else. I worked under all three of you from 2018 to 2020 in the marketing analytics department before I moved to the strategy division and eventually worked my way up to this position. I'm now the Senior Vice President of Operations, and I oversee hiring decisions for all mid to senior level positions in this company. The positions you're interviewing for today would report directly to my division. Let me tell you, watching that information sink in was something I'll never forget. Sarah's professional smile completely vanished, replaced by an expression of pure panic. Marcus, who had always carried himself with such arrogance, suddenly looked like a scared child. Jennifer's face went through a series of emotions in rapid succession: shock, fear, calculation, and finally, a desperate attempt at damage control. But before any of them could speak, before they could launch into the apologies and explanations I knew were coming, I held up my hand to stop them. We have a lot to discuss, I said, and we're going to take our time with this conversation because you need to understand exactly who I am now, and I need to understand why I should even consider employing any of you after what you put me through. The thing about power is that it's intoxicating when you've never had it before, especially when you suddenly have it over the people who once wielded it against you. I could see them calculating frantically, trying to figure out how to salvage this situation, how to transform from the people who had tormented me into the victims of a misunderstanding, or better yet, into repentant individuals who had learned and grown. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I had earned this position through years of grueling work, through nights when I questioned my own worth because of how they had treated me, through countless moments of self-doubt that they had planted in my mind like poisonous seeds. I had clawed my way up from the bottom, had proven myself over and over again in ways they never had to because people had handed them opportunities while I had to fight for scraps. And now, sitting across from them in this conference room with its floor-to-ceiling windows and its view of a city that once seemed impossible to conquer, I held all the cards. Sarah was the first to speak, her voice shaking slightly despite her obvious attempt to sound composed. "Alex, I had no idea," she began, but I cut her off immediately. "No," I said, the firmness in my voice surprising even myself. "We're not going to do it that way. You don't get to explain or justify or apologize yet. First, I'm going to tell you exactly what your behavior did to me, and you're going to sit there and listen, really listen, probably for the first time in your careers." I could see them exchange glances, unsure whether to stay or leave, weighing their desperation for employment against their pride. But they stayed. Of course they stayed. They needed these jobs, needed the salary, needed the position to maintain their lifestyles and their professional reputations. And I knew it. They knew I knew it. That power dynamic hung in the air between us like a physical thing, palpable and undeniable. I started with Sarah because she had always been the most vocally cruel. "Do you remember," I asked her, "when you told me in the middle of the open office floor that my analysis was so poorly done that a high school student could have done better? Do you remember how everyone heard it? How people avoided eye contact with me for the rest of the day because they were embarrassed for me? I was working 70-hour weeks on that project, Sarah. I was analyzing 3 years' worth of consumer data, building predictive models from scratch, and your feedback, your professional guidance as my supervisor, was to humiliate me publicly rather than provide constructive criticism privately." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but I kept going. "That analysis, by the way, the one you said was high school level, became the foundation for a strategy that increased market share by 18% over 2 years. But you wouldn't know that because after you dismissed it, I took it to another department where someone actually recognized its value. Someone who became my mentor, who saw potential in me that you were too blind or too threatened to see." I watched a tear form in Sarah's eye, but I felt no sympathy. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because those tears were for herself, for her current predicament, not for the person she had hurt years ago. Then I turned to Marcus, and I could see him bracing himself, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him rather than on me. "Marcus," I said, letting his name hang in the air for a moment, "you blocked my promotion twice. Twice I was recommended by other managers. Twice I had earned it through my performance metrics, and twice you vetoed it. Do you want to know what you told HR when they questioned your decision? You said I lacked leadership presence and emotional maturity." I pulled out my phone, opened a file, and began reading from a performance review he had written about me. Quote, "Employee demonstrates inadequate strategic thinking and inability to command respect from peers. Does not display the gravitas necessary for advancement. Recommend continued development in current role." I looked up at him, watching him shrink into his chair. Those words, Marcus, those words you wrote so casually, delayed my career progression by 2 years. 2 years of being passed over while people who were less qualified, people who you liked better because they played golf with you, or laughed at your jokes, got the opportunities I had earned. Do you know what that does to a person? Do you understand the psychological weight of being told over and over that you're not good enough when you know, deep in your core, that you are? I had to go to therapy, Marcus. I developed anxiety about performance reviews. I started doubting every decision I made because you had planted this seed in my mind that my judgment was flawed, that my thinking was inadequate. And you know what the worst part was? I started believing it. I started thinking that maybe you were right, that maybe I really didn't have what it took. That's what your abusive power did to me. Marcus finally looked up at me and I could see genuine remorse in his eyes. Or maybe it was just fear disguised as remorse. I honestly couldn't tell and didn't particularly care at that moment. But I wasn't finished. I turned to Jennifer, saving her for last because her betrayal had been the most calculated, the most deliberately harmful. "Jennifer," I said, and my voice had an edge to it now that I couldn't quite control, "you actually tried to get me fired. Not just once, but you orchestrated an entire campaign to discredit me because I had discovered an error in your reporting to executives. An error that would have cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars if it hadn't been corrected. Instead of acknowledging the mistake, instead of thanking me for catching it before it became a disaster, you spent 3 months spreading rumors about my competence, my work ethic, even my personal life. You told people I was unreliable, that I missed deadlines, that I was difficult to work with, none of which was true. You created a narrative about me that nearly destroyed my reputation in the industry because you couldn't handle being wrong. Jennifer's face had gone pale, her earlier composure completely shattered. I actually have documentation of all of this, I continued, because when HR investigated your claims against me, they kept records. Records that I requested under company policy when I was promoted to management. Would you like to know what they found? They found that every single accusation you made against me was unfounded. Every single one. But by the time that investigation concluded, the damage was done. People had already formed opinions about me based on your lies. I had to work twice as hard as everyone else just to prove that I wasn't the person you had painted me to be. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable, exactly as I intended it to be. I wanted them to sit in that discomfort, to feel even a fraction of what I had felt under their supervision. I wanted them to understand that actions have consequences, that the people you step on while climbing the ladder don't just disappear. They sometimes end up above you, looking down, remembering everything. Have any of you experienced something similar, I wonder? Have you ever been in a position where someone who wronged you ended up needing something from you? Comment below and share your story, because I think we all need to hear these experiences, to understand that workplace bullying and abuse of power aren't just abstract concepts. They're real traumas that real people carry with them. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute or two, Sarah spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex, we were horrible to you. There's no excuse for what we did. If I could go back and change it, I would. I looked at her, really looked at her, trying to determine if her remorse was genuine or performative. It's interesting, I said, how clarity comes when you need something from the person you wronged. Would you be saying this if I weren't in a position to give you a job? Would you even remember me if we had passed on the street? Would you have ever thought about the impact your actions had on my life if this meeting hadn't happened? These are genuine questions, Sarah, and I need you to really think about your answers before you speak. She took a shaky breath, and I could see her struggling with the truth. Honestly, she said, and I appreciated the honesty even if I didn't like it, probably not. Not because I didn't care, but because I never allowed myself to think about it. It was easier to justify my behavior as tough management, as pushing you to be better, rather than acknowledge that I was just being cruel because I was insecure about my own position. That answer, as painful as it was to hear, was more valuable than any apology could have been because it was real. Marcus nodded slowly, adding, I was threatened by you, Alex. Even back then I could see that you had something I didn't, a genuine talent and passion for the work. I blocked your promotion because I was afraid that if you advanced, people would start comparing us, and I knew I wouldn't come out favorably in that comparison. So I kept you down to protect myself, and I told myself I was doing it for legitimate professional reasons, but that was a lie. I was just scared. Jennifer was the last to speak, and her voice was thick with emotion. What I did was unforgivable, she said simply. I tried to destroy your career to save face, to protect my ego. There's no justification for that. If you never want to see me again, if you reject my application and blacklist me from every company in this industry, I would understand. I deserve that. Their confessions hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift inside me. The anger was still there, the hurt was still there, but something else was emerging too, something I hadn't expected to feel in this moment. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, at least not yet, but it was a recognition of their humanity, a understanding that hurt people, and that the cycle continues unless someone chooses to break it. But before I could fully process these feelings, I needed to tell them the rest of my story, the part they didn't know, the journey from that broken employee they remembered to the executive sitting across from them now. After you three made my life unbearable, I said, leaning back in my chair, I seriously considered leaving the industry entirely. I had nightmares about coming to work. I would sit in my car in the parking garage every morning, sometimes for 30 minutes, just trying to build up the courage to walk into the building. I started having panic attacks during meetings. My personal relationships suffered because I was so emotionally drained by what was happening at work that I had nothing left to give to the people who loved me. I was at my absolute lowest point, questioning everything about myself, about my abilities, about my worth as a professional and as a person. And that's when something happened that changed everything. There was a senior executive in the company, someone none of you probably noticed because she wasn't in your immediate orbit, and she saw one of your public humiliations of me. It was actually you, Sarah, during a presentation where you criticized my work in front of the board. This executive, her name was Margaret Chen, no relation despite the same last name, approached me afterwards. I expected another lecture, another person telling me I needed to toughen up or develop thicker skin, all the victim-blaming responses I had gotten used to hearing. But instead she looked at me and said, "That was brilliant work they just tore apart. Don't let them break you. Come see me tomorrow." I almost didn't go. I almost let the fear and the self-doubt win. But something in her eyes that day, a recognition, a solidarity, made me show up at her office the next morning. She told me she had been through something similar early in her career, that she had almost let the bullies win, but someone had given her a chance and she wanted to pay it forward. She became my mentor, my advocate, and eventually my champion. She helped me transfer to a different division where my skills were appreciated, where I could grow without someone actively trying to sabotage me. And I thrived. Oh, how I thrived. Without the constant weight of your harassment, without the daily psychological warfare, I discovered that I was actually exceptional at what I did. I started winning accounts, developing strategies that got noticed at the highest levels of the company. I worked harder than I had ever worked before, not because I was trying to prove something to you, but because I was finally in an environment where hard work was rewarded rather than punished. Within a year, I had been promoted to senior analyst. A year after that, director of strategic planning. 2 years later, VP of strategy. And 6 months ago, I was named senior vice president of operations, overseeing multiple divisions and hundreds of employees. Each promotion was earned through results, through innovation, through leadership that lifted people up rather than tearing them down. I became the kind of leader I wished I had when I was working under you. I mentored people who reminded me of my younger self, people with talent who were being overlooked or undermined. I created systems to prevent the kind of abuse I experienced. I built a team culture based on psychological safety, where people could make mistakes and learn from them without fear of humiliation, where credit was given where it was due, where performance was measured objectively rather than based on who played politics best. And the irony, the beautiful irony that I couldn't have scripted better if I tried, is that my division became the most successful in the company. We consistently exceeded our targets. We had the highest employee satisfaction scores. We attracted the best talent because word got around that we were the place where good people could do great work without being destroyed in the process. Margaret, my mentor, retired last year, and before she left, she told me something I'll never forget. She said, "Alex, you took the worst experience of your professional life and turned it into something that's making the company better for everyone. That's not just resilience, that's transformation. And that's why you'll go further than people like your old supervisors ever could, because you learned that real power isn't about dominating people, it's about elevating them." "So here we are," I said, bringing my focus back to the 3 people sitting across from me. Their earlier confidence completely evaporated, replaced by a mixture of shame, fear, and perhaps the beginning of genuine understanding. "You came here looking for jobs, and I'm sitting here with the power to give them to you or not. The old me, the me you knew, would have jumped at this chance for revenge. I could reject your applications, blacklist you in the industry, make your professional lives as difficult as you made mine. I could savor this power in the worst possible way, becoming exactly what you were to me. And I'll be honest, part of me wants to do that. Part of me wants you to experience even a fraction of the helplessness and despair I felt under your supervision. But I've learned something important in my journey from where you left me to where I am now. Revenge might feel good in the moment, but it doesn't actually heal anything. It doesn't undo the harm that was done. It doesn't make me feel better about what happened. It just perpetuates the cycle of hurt, and I refuse to let what you did to me turn me into what you were." Marcus looked up at me with something like hope in his eyes, but I held up my hand again. "However," I continued, and my tone made it clear that there were conditions coming. "That doesn't mean I'm just going to hand you these positions and pretend the past didn't happen. That wouldn't be fair to me, and honestly, it wouldn't be fair to you either, because you need to actually reckon with what you did and change, not just say you're sorry and move on. Here's what I'm proposing, and I want you to think very carefully before you respond. I'm willing to consider hiring each of you, but not for the positions you applied for. Those positions require a level of ethical leadership and emotional intelligence that, based on our history, I'm not confident you possess yet. Instead, I'm offering you entry-level management positions in my division, Roles that are several steps below what you've been doing, with significantly lower compensation than what you're probably used to. You would report to people who are younger than you, who have less experience than you, and you would have to prove yourself from the ground up just like I had to do. You would work in an environment where bullying is not tolerated, where credit theft is grounds for immediate termination, where we prioritize psychological safety and collaborative success over individual glory. You would be evaluated every quarter, not just on your performance metrics, but on how you treat the people around you, how you lift others up, how you contribute to a positive culture. If you can demonstrate over time that you've genuinely changed, that you've learned from your mistakes and become better leaders, then there's room for advancement. But that advancement would be earned, not given, and it would be based on merit, not politics. I paused, letting this offer sink in, watching them process what I was proposing. I know this isn't what you were hoping for, I continued. I know it's a massive step down from where you were, and I know it probably feels humiliating to accept such a demotion from someone you once supervised. And that's exactly the point. You need to understand what it feels like to be at the bottom, to have to prove yourself to people who have power over you, to work in a system where your value is determined by what you contribute rather than who you can step on. Sarah was the first to respond, her voice still shaky but carrying a note of determination. "I'll take it," she said. "If you're willing to give me a chance to prove I've changed, I'll take whatever role you're offering. I need this job. Yes, but more than that, I need to make this right, even if it takes years." Marcus nodded in agreement, adding, "I deserve this. Actually, I deserve worse than this. The fact that you're offering me anything at all is more grace than I showed you. If you're willing to take the risk on me, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove I'm not that person anymore." Jennifer took longer to respond, and I could see her struggling with her pride, with the reality of what accepting this offer would mean for her career trajectory, for her ego. Finally, she looked at me directly and said, "I'm afraid I'll fail. I'm afraid I'll revert to old patterns when things get hard, when I feel threatened. But I want to try. I need to try, not just for my career, but for myself, because I can't keep being the person I was. If you're willing to hold me accountable and help me become better, I'm willing to do the work." Their answer surprised me, I'll admit. I had expected more resistance, more negotiation, more inability to accept such a dramatic change in their circumstances. But perhaps hitting rock bottom professionally had given them a clarity they hadn't possessed before. Or perhaps they were just desperate enough to accept anything. Either way, I found myself believing, or at least wanting to believe, that change was possible. "All right," I said, standing up from my chair and walking to the window, looking out at the city spread below us. "Here's how this is going to work. You'll start in 2 weeks. You'll go through the same onboarding process as any new employee. No special treatment, no shortcuts. You'll be assigned to different teams within my division so you can't recreate your old alliance and fall back into old patterns. You'll meet with me individually every month for the first year to discuss your progress, and those meetings will not be comfortable. I will call out any behavior that reflects your old patterns, and you will have to be open to that feedback in a way you never were when I tried to give you feedback years ago. I will be watching, not because I want you to fail, but because I need to know if this experiment in redemption is actually working or if I'm putting other people at risk by bringing you into my division." I turned back to face them, and I could see they were all still processing, still trying to fully comprehend how radically their lives had just changed in the span of this one meeting. "There's one more thing," I said, "and this is non-negotiable. As part of your employment, you're each going to participate in a leadership development program I've created specifically for managers who have abused their power in the past. You'll work with a professional coach. You'll attend workshops on emotional intelligence and psychological safety. You'll read books and articles about ethical leadership, and you'll write reflective essays about your past behavior and your journey to change. This isn't punishment, although I understand it might feel that way. It's an investment in your development, and it's also my insurance policy that you're serious about this transformation." They all agreed, perhaps because they felt they had no choice, perhaps because they genuinely wanted to change. Time would tell which it was. As they prepared to leave, gathering their things with an awkward mixture of relief and continued shame, Sarah turned back to me. "Alex," she said, "thank you. I know I don't deserve this chance, and I know words are cheap compared to the harm we caused, but I promise I will spend every day trying to earn your trust and prove that people can change." I nodded, not quite ready to say I forgave them, but also not wanting to leave things on a completely harsh note. We'll see, I said simply. Change is proven through action over time, not through promises made in moments of desperation. Show me through your work, through how you treat people, through who you become in this environment. That's the only thank you I need. After they left, I sat alone in that conference room for a long time, processing what had just happened, trying to understand my own feelings about the decision I had made. Part of me worried that I had been too soft, that I should have just rejected them and moved on. Another part wondered if I was being cruel by offering them such a significant demotion, if I was perpetuating a cycle of humiliation even as I claimed to be breaking it. But mostly, I felt something unexpected. I felt free. For years, I had carried the weight of what they did to me, had let it fuel my ambition but also poison my peace. And in that moment of confrontation, in watching them face the consequences of their actions and offering them a path to redemption that they would have never offered me, I felt that weight begin to lift. The following months were fascinating to watch. Sarah started in a junior management position overseeing a small team of analysts. I observed her carefully, looking for signs of her old behavior, the condescension, the public humiliation, the need to dominate. At first she was overly cautious, almost too gentle with her feedback, afraid to assert any authority at all. But gradually, she found a balance. I watched her stay late to help a team member who was struggling with a presentation, offering constructive feedback privately and with genuine encouragement. I saw her give credit in meetings to her team rather than claiming their ideas as her own. One day I overheard her talking to a new employee who had made a significant mistake, and instead of the public shaming I remembered so vividly, she said, "Let's figure out what went wrong and how we can prevent it next time. Mistakes are learning opportunities, not character flaws." I almost didn't recognize her. Marcus was placed in a role managing operational logistics, a detail-oriented position that was far from the strategic planning work he had done before. He struggled initially with the ego hit of working under people he considered less experienced than himself. I could see the frustration in his face during team meetings when decisions were made that he disagreed with, and I wondered if he would be able to handle not being the one in charge. But something interesting happened around month 3. I noticed him starting to ask questions rather than make declarations, seeking to understand different perspectives rather than immediately asserting his own. He started acknowledging what he didn't know, something the old Marcus would have never done because admission of any ignorance was seen as weakness in his worldview. During one of our monthly check-ins, he told me something that stuck with me. He said, "Alex, the hardest part of this hasn't been the pay cut or the title change. It's been confronting how much of my identity was wrapped up in feeling superior to others. I built my self-worth on being better than, smarter than, more important than the people around me. And when that was stripped away, when I had to just be a regular person doing regular work without any special status, I realized how empty that version of success was. I'm actually happier now, which is insane to say given the circumstances, but it's true. I'm building real relationships with my colleagues instead of maintaining a careful distance to preserve my authority. I'm learning things because I'm actually listening instead of waiting for my turn to talk. This experience has been humiliating and transformative, and I needed both of those things. Jennifer's journey was perhaps the most complicated. She was assigned to a project management role that required extensive collaboration with other departments. Her political maneuvering skills, the ones she had used so effectively and destructively in the past, were suddenly useless in an environment where transparency and direct communication were the norm. She had several setbacks in the first few months, moments where I could see her old instincts kicking in, the impulse to shift blame, to protect herself at others' expense, to manipulate information to make herself look better. Each time I called her on it in our monthly meetings, and each time I could see her wrestling with the choice between defending her behavior and actually examining why she had done it. The breakthrough came during a project that went badly off track due to unforeseen technical issues. The old Jennifer would have found someone to blame, would have created a narrative that protected her reputation at all costs. But instead, in the meeting where the project failure was discussed, she did something that shocked everyone in the room. She stood up and said, "This is my responsibility. I missed warning signs that things were going off track because I was too focused on looking good, rather than actually managing effectively. I need to own this failure and learn from it." After the meeting, several colleagues approached me expressing surprise and respect for her honesty. One of them said, "I worked with Jennifer years ago in a different department. and she would have never taken accountability like that. Whatever you're doing with her, it's working. But I knew it wasn't me doing anything to her. It was her finally doing the work on herself that she should have done years ago. Work that only happened because she was put in a position where her old coping mechanisms no longer served her. Have you ever watched someone transform before your eyes? Not a dramatic overnight change, but a slow, sometimes painful evolution into someone better than who they were. Comment below if you've witnessed or experienced this kind of change, because I think we need more stories about redemption and growth, not just revenge and punishment. Over time, something unexpected happened. These three people who had made my life miserable, who I had imagined confronting and destroying in various revenge fantasies during my darkest days under their supervision, became actual assets to my team. Sarah developed a reputation as someone who genuinely cared about developing talent. Her past cruelty transformed into a deep commitment to never make anyone feel the way she had made others feel. Marcus became known for his humility and his willingness to learn from anyone regardless of their position or experience level, a complete reversal of his former arrogance. Jennifer, perhaps the most dramatic transformation of all, became an advocate for transparency and ethical leadership, speaking openly about her past mistakes in leadership workshops, and helping other managers recognize and correct their own abusive patterns. About a year into this experiment, Margaret, my former mentor who had since retired, invited me to lunch. She wanted to know how things were going, and I told her the whole story. About the interview, about the confrontation, about the decision I had made to offer them positions rather than simply reject them. She listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions, and when I finished, she smiled in that wise way she had and said, "You know what you did, don't you? You broke the cycle. People like your former supervisors usually continue their pattern of abuse until they retire or are forced out. They never change because they never face real consequences, never have to confront the harm they've caused. But you gave them both consequences and a path forward. That's not weakness, Alex, that's the highest form of leadership." I had tears in my eyes hearing her say that because I had been questioning my decision so often, wondering if I had been too forgiving, if I had betrayed my younger self who had suffered so much under their supervision. But Margaret continued, "The you from 5 years ago needed someone to fight for you, to protect you, to remove you from that toxic situation. I tried to be that person, but the you sitting here today is someone different. You're someone with power now, and how you use that power defines not just who you are, but what kind of leader you'll be, and what kind of organization you'll build. You could have used that power to punish them, and no one would have blamed you, but you chose to use it to create an opportunity for transformation, not just for them, but for everyone who works under them now and will work under them in the future. Every person they lead differently because of what they learned from this experience is a ripple effect of your decision to break the cycle rather than continue it." Her words helped me see my decision in a new light, not as a potential betrayal of my past self, but as an honoring of everything I had learned from that painful experience. 2 years after that confrontation in the conference room, something remarkable happened. Sarah, Marcus, and Jennifer were all promoted again, this time to senior management positions that actually reflected their experience level, earned through 2 years of demonstrated change and ethical leadership. The decision wasn't mine alone. It went through the standard review process with input from their colleagues, direct reports, and supervisors, people who had no knowledge of our history, who evaluated them purely based on the leaders they had become, not the leaders they used to be. During the company town hall where the promotions were announced, I watched them from across the room. They each gave brief speeches about their new roles and their vision for their teams, and I was struck by how different they were from the people who had walked into that conference room 2 years earlier. They talked about servant leadership, about creating psychologically safe environments, about the importance of recognizing and developing talent in others. They talked about learning from failure, about the value of feedback, about leading with humility and empathy. They sounded like the leaders I wished I had when I was starting out, and I realized with some surprise that I was actually proud of them, proud of the courage it took to accept such a dramatic reset of their careers, proud of the work they had done to genuinely change. After the town hall, Jennifer approached me. She asked if we could talk privately, and I agreed. We went to a quiet conference room, and she sat down with the kind of nervous energy I remembered from that first interview, though for entirely different reasons now. "Alex," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. These past 2 years working in your division have been the best professional experience of my career. Not because of the success or the eventual promotion, but because for the first time I felt like I was becoming the person I always should have been. I was a terrible leader before, and I was a terrible person in many ways. I told myself I was just being strategic or just being tough, but the truth is I was deeply insecure, and I handled that insecurity by making other people feel small. Working under your leadership, being held accountable while also being given a genuine chance to change, has transformed not just how I work, but how I live my entire life. She paused, and I could see she was trying not to cry. My daughter is in middle school now, she continued, and last week she came home upset because some girls at school were bullying her friend. She asked me what she should do, and I told her to stand up for her friend, to not be a bystander, to be brave even when it's uncomfortable. And as I was giving her this advice, I realized that 5 years ago, I was exactly like those bullies. I was the person who made other people's lives harder to make myself feel better. But I can give my daughter different advice now because I'm different now. That change didn't happen because you destroyed me like you could have. It happened because you challenged me to be better and gave me an environment where being better was possible. I don't think I ever properly thanked you for that. And I know a thank you doesn't erase the harm I caused you. But I need you to know that saving my career also saved a lot of other people from experiencing what you experienced under my supervision. I didn't know what to say. I had prepared myself for many possible outcomes of this experiment. This choice I had made to offer redemption rather than revenge. But I hadn't fully prepared myself for the emotional impact of witnessing genuine transformation. Thank you for telling me that, I finally said. It means more than you know to hear that this journey has changed you in ways that extend beyond just your work life. That was always the hope, that by breaking the cycle with you three, I could prevent countless other people from experiencing what I experienced. Sarah and Marcus both reached out in the following weeks with similar sentiments, sharing how the experience had changed them, and thanking me for the opportunity to become better versions of themselves. Marcus told me he had reconnected with several former employees he had treated poorly, apologizing and trying to make amends where possible. Sarah started volunteering as a mentor for early career professionals, focusing especially on supporting people who were being undermined by their supervisors, using her own story as a cautionary tale about the cost of cruel leadership. As I reflect on this entire experience now, from that lowest point under their supervision to the confrontation in the conference room, to watching them transform over these past few years, I've learned something profound about power and how we choose to wield it. Revenge is easy. Punishment is easy. It's satisfying in an immediate, visceral way to see someone who hurt you face consequences, to watch them suffer as you suffered. And I won't lie and say I didn't experience satisfaction in that confrontation, in watching recognition dawn on their faces, in seeing them squirm as I recounted what they had done to me. That moment of power reversal was intoxicating. But the harder choice, the choice that required more strength and more courage, was to use that power not to perpetuate the cycle of harm, but to break it. To say you hurt me terribly, but I'm not going to become you, I'm going to give you a chance to become better, with the full understanding that you might fail, that you might waste this opportunity, that I might be putting other people at risk by bringing you into my organization. It was a calculated risk, and it required me to believe that people can change, really change, not just perform change when it benefits them, but fundamentally transform their character and their approach to leadership. And here's what I want you to understand, because this is important. This story isn't just about 3 people who abused their power and later found redemption. It's about the choice we all face when we gain power, especially power over people who have wronged us. We can use that power to settle scores, to balance the scales, to make them feel what we felt. Or we can use that power to create change, to break cycles, to build the kind of environment we wished we had when we were powerless. Neither choice is wrong exactly. Sometimes refusing to give second chances is the right call, especially if there's no genuine remorse or willingness to change. Sometimes protecting future victims by denying someone a position of power is the ethical choice. I'm not suggesting that forgiveness and redemption should always be the path, but in this case, something in that confrontation, seeing their genuine shock and shame, hearing their confessions about insecurity and fear, made me believe that transformation was possible. And more than that, it made me realize that becoming the kind of leader who only punishes and never rehabilitates would mean they had succeeded in changing me. in making me bitter and vindictive, in turning me into someone who saw power as a weapon rather than a responsibility. Looking back now, I can see that the moment I truly won wasn't when I watched them recognize who I had become. It wasn't when I saw the fear in their eyes as they realized I controlled their professional futures. The moment I truly won was when I chose not to become them, when I chose to build something better rather than simply tear them down. That's the power I want to talk about. The power of choosing growth over grudges, transformation over revenge. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a position where you could have sought revenge but chose a different path? Or maybe you did seek revenge and learned something from that choice. The lessons we learn about power, justice, and forgiveness are so important, and sharing our stories helps all of us navigate these incredibly difficult situations. Drop your experiences in the comments, because I genuinely want to hear how others have handled moments like these. Understanding the content of this story is crucial, because these situations are more common than we might think. Workplace bullying, abuse of power, and the complex questions about redemption and second chances are experiences that many people face at some point in their careers. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own experiences with power dynamics, with revenge, with forgiveness, do me a favor and hit that like button. Your engagement helps this story reach more people who might need to hear it, who might be in that dark place I was in years ago and need to know that things can get better, that the pain doesn't last forever, and that you have choices about what kind of person you become on the other side of trauma. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about real human experiences, about growth and transformation, about the complicated nature of justice and redemption, make sure you subscribe to My Truth Revealed Tales. We share authentic stories about life's most challenging moments and the wisdom we gain from navigating them. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that might just change your perspective or help you through your own difficult situation. Because here's the truth I've learned through all of this. We're all doing our best to navigate complicated situations with imperfect information and complex emotions. We all make mistakes, some worse than others. We all hurt people, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. And we all have the capacity to change, to grow, to become better than we were. The question is whether we'll do the hard work required for that transformation, and whether the people we've hurt will give us the space to try. I chose to give that space to Sarah, Marcus, and Jennifer. It wasn't easy, it wasn't simple, and it required me to be vulnerable in ways that felt risky. But watching their transformation, seeing them become leaders who now actively work to prevent the kind of harm they once caused, has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my career. It proved to me that the cycle of abuse and retaliation can be broken, that power can be used to heal rather than harm, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is offer grace when vengeance would be easier. Thank you for listening to my story, for taking this journey with me from that dark period of workplace abuse through the shocking confrontation to this place of unexpected resolution. Share your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to My Truth Revealed Tales for more authentic stories about the human experience. Remember, your story matters too, and the choices you make about how to handle your own moments of power and pain will ripple out into the world in ways you might never fully understand. Choose wisely, choose kindly when you can, but always choose to protect your own well-being and dignity. Until next time, this is My Truth Revealed.